When a doll possessed by the spirit of a criminal invades the White House, 3 young people decide to go after it to stop the demonic toy from starting World War III. Today we're going to recap the 3rd season of the series, Chucky, from 2023. One night, while sleeping in his room, young Henry hears suspicious whispers and immediately runs to hide in his closet. Minutes later, his mother appears and tries to reassure him, but the boy knows that there are ghosts living in that house. Despite his fear, Henry returns to bed and asks Joseph, who is actually Chucky, to protect him from the ghosts. The boy is the only one who can communicate with Joseph, but Charlotte claims that these voices are created by her son's imagination. When his mother leaves, Henry says goodnight to Joseph and the doll promptly answers him. Minutes later, all the lights in the White House go out and the guards rush to the rooms to take the president and his family to safety. According to the energy company, no place other than the White House was affected, so the security guards begin to suspect that the mansion is under attack. When the whole family is on their way to the elevator, Henry says that his doll has disappeared and Teddy returns to look for it. After finding the doll lying on the ground, the security guard takes it back to Henry and the group begins to descend into the basement. During the descent, the guard dog accompanying the security team starts barking at Joseph and suddenly the elevator lights go out. Soon after, the power comes back on, so the security guards decide to take James and his family back to their rooms. The next day, Jake goes live to show his followers his collection of bizarre dolls. According to him, Chucky is the only item missing from his collection, but the problem is that this doll is no longer available on the market. So he asks his followers to help him find someone who has this relic and is willing to sell it. That morning, Henry is having coffee with his family and takes the opportunity to show them the book he found in the library. Reading it, the boy discovered that a former president had perished in the White House and his spirit has been haunting the place ever since. After hearing this story, Grant takes the opportunity to terrorize his younger brother even more and Charlotte gets up to take Henry to school. Before leaving, the boy asks his father to take Joseph to work, as the doll wants to see James's office. Hours later, during a meeting with his team, the president discovers that the previous night's blackout happened because the White House was hacked and decides to take some security measures to ensure that his family is not in danger. Meanwhile, Joseph is sitting in an armchair listening to the whole conversation and preparing to put his evil plan into action. In the neighboring town, Lexi uses her social networks to attract the attention of the audience in the hope of finding her missing sister. Last Christmas, her mother was eliminated in a terrible way by Chucky and her younger sister was taken away. Lexi then shows the last photo she took of Caroline and asks her followers to help her find her. Later, when he returns to his office, James realizes that Joseph is not in the chair where he was left. Instead, he is sitting in the president's armchair. Suspicious, he goes to his secretary and asks who entered his office, but Sam says she was the only one there. In the evening, when he returns home, Henry goes to talk to his father and James says that he left the doll in the boy's room. Before entering, the boy asks Teddy to search the room and, as he approaches Joseph, the security guard finds a small dagger. When he realizes he has been discovered, Chucky steals Teddy's gun and blows his head off with one shot. The doll then puts the gun in the security guard's hand, making it look like he has taken his own life. After committing the crime, Chucky calls Jake and gives him a clue as to where he is, because he knows the young man is trying to find him. A few days later, Teddy's funeral takes place and James attends the ceremony with his family. While mourning the perished of his best friend, Henry holds Joseph on his lap, without even realizing that it was the doll that had eliminated him. As the case involves a White House official, dozens of reporters show up to cover the story and all the members of James's family end up on TV. Through this report, Jake and his friends discover the doll's whereabouts and decide to go after it. A few days after Teddy's perishment, James and Charlotte hire an investigator to find out if any criminals may be involved in the case. Seeing Chucky sitting in the chair next to him, Price asks what it is and the couple reveal that it is their son's doll. A year ago, Joseph, James and Charlotte's youngest son, perished and Henry decided to name the doll after his late brother. While the boy is at school, Price takes the opportunity to investigate the crime scene and finds small footprints in Henry's closet. That day, Lexi and her friends arrive in Washington with Rachel, her legal guardian, and the young woman starts chatting with Grant on social media. During the conversation, she manages to arrange a meeting with the young man and the two agree to see each other in a coffee shop the next day. That night, when the president leaves the office, Sam goes in to tidy up and finds Chucky. When she picks it up, the secretary is attacked by the doll and it uses a small blade to cut the woman's neck, which ends up bleeding till elimination. Soon after, Price shows up and finds Sam's body, so he goes into the office to start a new investigation. After analyzing the crime scene, he sends a message to Charlotte, who despairs at the sight of her secretary's body. With the elimination of the two officials, Price comes to believe that there is a criminal infiltrating the White House, so he decides to keep Sam's elimination a secret so as not to tarnish James's reputation as president. Discreetly, the detective disposes of the woman's body and enlists Charlotte's help so that not even the president finds out what happened to her. The next day, as arranged, Grant meets Lexi and her friends at a coffee shop in the city center and, after a few minutes of conversation, he invites her to visit the White House. Before agreeing to welcome 3 unknown orphans into her home, Charlotte decides to arrange a meeting with Rachel. However, during the conversation, the First Lady receives a message and leaves to talk to Price. While the investigator is telling Charlotte about his latest findings, Rachel is attacked by Chucky, who uses a flag to eliminate her. After committing the crime, the doll calls Charlotte and reveals that he has left her a present. Immediately, the woman and the detective return to the salon and find Rachel lifeless. Desperate, Charlotte picks up the phone to call the police, but Price threatens her to keep the existence of the criminal a secret. As she doesn't want her husband's old betrayal to come to light, Charlotte decides to keep her mouth shut. That night, Chucky uses Rachel's cell phone to contact Jake, and the trio discover that their guardian has been eliminated by the doll, as have their parents. After the perishment of her mother, Lexi took on the mission of finding her sister, who she believes has been taken by criminals. What the young woman doesn't realize is that Caroline is just as cruel as Chucky and has worked together with the doll to find and eliminate the people who have harmed him in some way. After eliminating Andy with his knife, Chucky savors his revenge, but soon realizes that there is something wrong with his body. For some reason, the doll is getting old and, after looking at his reflection in the mirror, Chucky decides to consult a voodoo book to find out how to become young again. However, Caroline says that the spell won't work and they decide to pay a visit to the doctor. After assessing him, Dr. Rosen says that the doll has been contaminated by Christian magic and is dying. According to the doctor, there is still no cure for this type of magic, but he suggests a possible solution for Chucky. In order to make peace with Damballa and allow his soul to remain incarnate in the doll, Chucky has to sacrifice 6 human lives. So that night, he chooses a target and enlists Caroline's help to break into one of the houses in the neighborhood. After entering the house, Chucky eliminates everyone inside with a knife while Caroline watches the chaos. The doll then makes a request to Damballa, but is completely ignored. Apparently, Chucky would have to do even more evil to win the entity's approval, so he decided to infiltrate the White House. On the day of his 5-year-old brother's funeral, Henry found the doll leaning against the headstone and Chucky introduced himself as Joseph. After that day, when the demonic doll finally managed to infiltrate the White House, the family's problems began. When Halloween arrives, Charlotte and Price decide to throw a party at the White House as a trap to lure the criminal. As Henry refuses to go to the party, his parents hire a nanny to look after him and Annie turns up dressed as Mary Poppins. Unlike the boy, Chucky is very excited for the night, as Halloween is his favorite holiday. Thanks to Grant, Lexi and her friends are also invited to the party and have the chance to meet James and Charlotte. Suddenly, during the celebration, the president spots a child in the middle of the hall and decides to approach him, because the boy looks very much like his son Joseph. However, on seeing James approaching, the child runs away and the president goes after him. A few minutes after arriving at the party, Lexi convinces Grant to introduce her to the mansion and distracts the young man while Jake and Devin go off in search of Chucky. However, when searching Henry's room, the pair realize that the doll isn't there and call Lexi to help them look for it. After going down to the party room, the trio find the boy with Chucky on his lap and he's holding a knife. Frightened, Devin tries to convince Henry to hand over the doll, but the conversation is interrupted when the lights go out. Just then, Chucky disappears and is found by the president. After picking him up, James feels confused, but is escorted by security to safety. Then Annie, the nanny, appears and claims to be feeling the presence of several spirits in the room. As she says this, the woman and everyone around her end up being crushed by a large chandelier that plummets from the ceiling. After this tragedy, the president and his entire family are taken to the secret room while Chucky tries to ask for Damballa's blessing again. After performing the ritual, the doll removes his mask and discovers that he is even older than before, which makes him completely angry. The next day, Chucky decides to rest in his room while Henry goes to school, as he is very weak. Even though he's about to perish at any moment, the doll continues with his evil thoughts and, when the chambermaid shows up to clean the room, he sees yet another opportunity to put his villainy into action. While the woman is collecting the dirty clothes, the doll changes the drink in her bottle for bleach and the cleaner ends up dying of poisoning. Sometime later, Henry comes into the room and finds his doll on the verge of elimination. As he grabs a blanket to warm him up, the boy sees Teddy's brains dripping down the wall and runs into his mother's arms. On hearing the boy's story, Charlotte decides to go to the bedroom to check what's going on and almost finds the body of the chambermaid. If that happened, Chucky would be ready to stab her, but luckily Charlotte doesn't see the body and manages to get out safely. That afternoon, Lexi manages to arrange a meeting with Grant and apologizes for what happened at the party. After making up, the teenagers agree to see each other at the weekend and, in the meantime, Jake and Devin go to see Dr. Rosen. During the consultation, they ask how to eliminate Chucky and discover that the doll is already dying. If he can't be cured of Christian magic in time, he won't be able to change hosts and his soul will be sent to the spirit world. Meanwhile, in his office, James continues to obsess over his son, as he believes he saw Joseph at the party. Suddenly, he sees a pool of blood on the floor and, as he gets closer, he sees the reflection of his lifeless secretary. Terrified, James turns away and the puddle spreads towards him, but when he opens his eyes again, he realizes that all the blood has disappeared. Immediately, the man runs to tell his wife what's going on and reveals that he saw Joseph during the Halloween party. However, Charlotte doesn't believe what her husband is saying and recommends that he sees a psychiatrist. Feeling guilty for not telling James the truth, Charlotte decides to go and talk to Price, whereupon the detective reveals his suspicions that the criminal they are looking for may be a supernatural entity. When she hears this, the First Lady laughs, as she doesn't believe it's possible. However, she soon changes her mind when she sees the United States flag moving on its own and simulating the attack Rachel suffered. That night, James decides to pay a visit to his perished son's room and finds Chucky on the boy's bed. The man then hears Joseph's voice telling him to be careful, but the doll manages to strike him from behind with a blow to the head. Now that he is dying, Chucky has become even more daring in his approaches and is willing to take everyone in the house to hell with him. After tearing off the president's ear, the doll gouges out his eyes and eliminates him to steal his password card. In this way, Chucky has access to every room in the White House. Minutes later, Charlotte finds her husband's body and calls Price to help her deal with the situation, as the woman doesn't know what else to do. While they are trying to discover the identity of the criminal, a message written in blood appears on the wall and says that it was Chucky who eliminated the president. Soon after, a team shows up to collect James's body and Charlotte tries to stop them, but soon remembers that her children are in danger and goes after them. She quickly rushes to Grant's room and orders the young man to pack because they are going to Chicago. However, before the woman and her children can leave the house, Price appears to stop them and says that until this case is resolved, she cannot leave the White House. Price's fear is that the existence of an attack on the White House by supernatural creatures will be made public, because if that happens, the whole country will collapse. When they return from their appointment with Dr. Rosen, Jake and Devin reveal that Chucky is dying, but Lexi is still determined to go after the doll to try and find out where her little sister is. That afternoon, Price summons Charlotte to a meeting and reveals that he has hired a paranormal expert to help him with the investigation. What's more, the detective has hired a stuntman to impersonate the president for the next few days. His name is Randall Jenkins, but physically he is identical to James. While Charlotte argues with Price about this plan, Lexi and her friends arrive at the White House and, along with them, a strong storm is approaching. During dinner, the First Lady sits down at the table with Grant and his friends to eat pizza, and the young man begins to wonder about his father's whereabouts. It's been a few days since James's elimination and Charlotte still hasn't broken the news to her children, so she does everything she can not to touch the subject. When the woman leaves the room for a moment, Lexi decides to come clean and tells Grant that Henry's doll is possessed by the spirit of a criminal. When he discovers that his family is in danger, the young man decides to help and, in the meantime, Henry decides to pay his father a visit. As he approaches the president's stunt double, Chucky shows his claws and points a gun at Randall. After taking him hostage, the puppet orders the stuntman to go down to the main hall and eliminates all the guards who try to stop him. After stealing the gun of one of the security guards, the doll forces Randall to give an order to attack the army. Chucky's plan is to bomb some countries in Europe in an attempt to start World War III, but Grant and his friends manage to find him before the missiles are launched. When confronted, the puppet reveals that, since he is going to be eliminated, his plan is to take 8 billion people with him. In this way, Chucky believes that he will be remembered as the greatest person who ever lived and will be forever marked in history. Just as the missile launch was about to take place, Jake attacks the doll and Randall manages to steal the gun. He then shoots the monster and Chucky is seriously injured. Just as he was about to perish, the doll presses the red button and sends a missile to the North Pole. Luckily, the detonation takes place far from civilization and no humans are hurt. Soon after, Chucky's body turns to ash and disappears, along with Lexi's hopes of finding Caroline. Despite Chucky's elimination, the spirit of Charles Ray, who was imprisoned in the doll, lives on and intends to carry out his revenge. After his perishment, Charles met Damballa on the spiritual plane and discovered that he must dedicate himself to making a 100% authorial sacrifice in the name of his god. After discovering why he had been abandoned by Damballa, Charles managed to convince him to give him another chance and return to the White House as a spirit to do his last job. In the morning, Price and the vice president talk about the speech they will be making soon, in which they will tell the public that the president is suffering from a serious illness. With James's perishment, Spencer Rhodes will take over and Randall will have to impersonate the president to announce his resignation. Meanwhile, Grant and his friends are locked in their room with no access to their cell phones so as not to spread the news on the internet. Suddenly, 2 security guards enter the room to collect Grant and take him to meet his mother and brother. While Charlotte and Grant argue, Henry is terrorized by Charles's ghost and no one understands why the boy is so desperate. At that moment, Dr. Carroll, a paranormal expert, and a talented medium arrive at the White House and Timothy soon realizes that there is something very wrong with the place. With the help of Co-op and Higgs, 2 extremely reliable security guards, Charlotte and her children manage to leave the White House, but Grant refuses to leave without Lexi. Instead, he says goodbye to his mother and enlists the support of Higgs to free his friends. Suddenly, Price appears and asks the young people to accompany him to his living room, because Carol and Timothy need help to get rid of the entities that reside in that house. While the medium tries to make contact with the deceased, Randall records a message to let everyone know that he is stepping away from politics to take care of his health. After making the announcement, the man discovers that Price intends to eliminate him in order to keep the whole operation secret and tries to escape. Realizing that he is surrounded, Randall enters the elevator, but one of the guards manages to catch up with him and they start a hand-to-hand fight until a huge amount of blood starts pouring from the ceiling. Soon, the pool began to fill up and, in his last seconds of life, Randall could clearly see Charles's image. When the elevator opens, Carol and the teenagers see the 2 lifeless men inside and Timothy decides to hold a demonstration session to try to get in touch with Chucky. However, during the invocation, supernatural phenomena begin to occur, causing despair in everyone present. Seeing a huge speaker rising, the young people move away so as not to be attacked, but Carol, the vice president and his secretary remain seated and end up being electrocuted. Now, the only way to stop Chucky is to enter the spiritual plane, and to do that, one has to be eliminated temporarily. As he is the person with the closest ties to Chucky, Jake volunteers to carry out this mission and Price applies a substance to the boy that causes cardiac arrest for 5 minutes. After that, he will be given another injection of a substance that will revive his heart, bringing Jake back to life. When he crosses over to the other side, the young man meets his father, who has been electrocuted, and has to get away from him. The man blames his son for his elimination and tries to attack him, but Jake says he forgives him for all the terrible things he's done and hugs him. After making up with Lucas, the young man goes after Charles and quickly manages to find him. However, instead of answering his questions, the doll takes Jake to see all his crimes, including that of Lucas, who was also eliminated by Chucky. When he realizes that Charles isn't willing to open up, Jake leaves and finds the other version of the doll. Incredibly, Chucky also has a kind side and that's who the young man is talking to at the moment. During the conversation, the creature reveals where Caroline is and Jake tries to convince it to self-destruct, so that it can never hurt other people again. But instead, the doll only distracts Jake so that Charles has the chance to possess the young man's body. As soon as Jake's 5 minutes are up, Devin injects him with the substance that will revive him. However, when the young man wakes up, it is Charles's soul that is in his body. In the meantime, while the young people were trying to communicate with the higher plane, Price and his men installed dozens of explosives around the house and the bombs went off. Hearing the noise of the explosions, Grant and his friends try to escape, but end up getting separated by the fire and Timothy gets into the elevator with Jake. As they both descend to the first floor, Charles attacks the medium and traps Timothy inside the burning elevator. During the fire, Grant goes looking for Hicks and finds his friend almost eliminated. Furious, he strikes Price and locks the detective inside his office, where he is attacked by dozens of spirits. As he has nowhere else to go, the man ends up caught in the flames and burned alive. On the other hand, Grant manages to escape with Devin and Lexi and finally finds his mother again. Jake then appears and hugs his friends, who still don't suspect that the young man's body has been taken over by Charles. That night, the trio go after Caroline, who, according to Chucky, is staying at the house of an elderly man called Wendell Wilkins. After receiving an invitation to enter the old man's house, the youngsters discover that he creates various dolls and considers them to be his children. It was Wendell who created the Chucky doll in 1987, and he reveals that he still has a replica in his closet. Just then, Caroline appears and Lexi runs to hug her, but soon discovers that her sister is a criminal and has been helping Chucky all this time. After this revelation, Lexi and Devin discover that Jake is possessed, but Caroline performs a spell to return Chucky's spirit to the doll. After the ritual, Jake's consciousness returns to his body and Charles is resurrected as a doll. Caroline then helps Chucky and Wendell to transfer the souls of the youngsters into the bodies of 3 other dolls. Hours later, in the middle of the night, Nika shows up at the mansion and finds the young people imprisoned, but she also ends up becoming another victim of Wendell. Meanwhile, Caroline hits the road and drives to the nearest town in the company of Chucky and his girlfriend, Tiffany. So what did you think of this series? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more series recaps. See you next time.